Hi everyone, my name is Bhavana and I'm the team leader for the Parkinson's disease research through Berkeley Pharma. And today I'm just going to be presenting my research with all of you and the research of my team. We looked at the effect of experiencing a traumatic brain injury on the onset of Parkinson's disease and understanding if there's a potential correlation between the two. Traumatic brain injury has been studied as a risk factor of Parkinson's disease. However, the direction of this correlation has not been understood, and there's inconclusive evidence in the research field uh, in terms of what this direction of correlation entails. Oh, so this is our team, and we worked really hard in making sure that we get our research out there and try to get it published. And each one of us has put tremendous hard work and effort. So this is our team. There's 9 of us in total. So what is Parkinson's disease? Parkinson's disease is a neurodegenerative disease, and it results in the decrease in dopamine concentration, which is a type of neurotransmitter. So there's a decrease in dopamine in the substantia nigra and the basal ganglia, as well as the presence of Lewy bodies. And there are many symptoms that are associated with Parkinson's disease, including shuffling gait. There's bradykinesia, which is the slowness of your movement. There's something known as a pill rolling tremor. There's resting tremor, which is without actually voluntarily moving your muscles. There's like a resting tremor of your hands, postural instability. There's a shuffling gait and difficulty with overall coordination. This is because the basal ganglia is a structure which is responsible for smoothing out movement and kind of regulating our overall movement. So if there's a decrease in dopamine concentration in this basal ganglia, it affects the overall movement that we have. So in the other side of it, what is traumatic brain injury? So traumatic brain injury is any violent blow to the head that causes any physiological changes, and these changes affect how we function and affect our normal functioning of our day-to-day life. And then through this research, we looked at how traumatic brain injury, which we've abbreviated as TBI, is linked to Parkinson's disease. So there has been an inconclusive evidence to the possible correlation between the two. While a lot of research suggests of a positive correlation where an increase in the incidence of TBI leads to the onset of Parkinson's disease, other research has shown the opposite trend where there's a reverse correlation. The direction of association is the other way, where those that are in their prodromal stages of Parkinson's, that means the stage of before you're experiencing the full onset of symptoms of Parkinson's, there's something known as a prodromal stage. So if you're in a prodromal stage, you're more likely to, for example, experience a fall. And when you experience a fall, that could be because of the prodromal symptoms of Parkinson's, which affect your movement, and not because of TBI leading to Parkinson's. So we were trying to do this research to understand a possible correlation between TBI and Parkinson's disease. So this slide talks about the prevalence of TBI and Parkinson's disease. Like I said, there's been inconclusive evidence. So we talked about findings in which there was no correlation, but with findings that there was a correlation. So this slide, we wanted to show to everyone who's viewing this and who's interested in the research that we do, that there is controversial evidence. There is research that shows that there isn't correlation, and there is research that shows there's strong correlation. And two examples was with the Finnish population, and they found no correlation when they looked at both Parkinson's and Alzheimer's with traumatic brain injury, as well as with one that was connected with the Danish population and also found no correlation. But on the flip side of things, we did find a correlation when we looked at the veteran population in the study by White et al. And this looked at the increase in the severity of TBI increased their risk of Parkinson's disease. So that was a positive correlation. Increasing the risk of TBI, or the incidence and the severity of the TBI, increased your chance of developing Parkinson's disease. And the same with Goldman study, but Goldman study was more of like a case control study. It was with twins, specific twins, and found that there was a greater increase once they had a head injury to develop Parkinson's disease. So in this slide, we looked at in this section of our paper, we kind of looked at the different demographics and how that changed with the development of Parkinson's disease and how that was different for traumatic brain injury, and then those that had traumatic brain injury and Parkinson's disease. So in general, Parkinson's disease was higher in men than women, and women have been found to be older at the onset of the disease. And we also put the mean diagnosis age around 70.5. For traumatic brain injury, it was vastly increased with age, where participants at 85 plus had a greater chance of having a traumatic brain injury. And this kind of makes sense if you think about it. The older you are, your voluntary movements and functioning kind of is not as good as when you're younger, and so they would experience more falls. Because from the research that we did, we actually found that traumatic brain injury that led to Parkinson's disease was more through like falls than anything else. And I think we're going to go into that in another slide. And in terms of both Parkinson's and TBI, we found that patients with TBI that are slightly older and more male, etc., have a higher chance of developing Parkinson's disease. So the risk factors, like I said, falls was one of the most common risk factors of traumatic brain injury. And the other thing that was traffic accidents. But we actually found that falls were the greater percentage of traumatic brain injury that led to Parkinson's disease. So for the genetic causes, we found like a gene mutation in LRP10 that was correlated with the onset of Parkinson's disease itself, suggesting that there's a hereditary basis. So other risk factors that we looked at was environmental factors, for example, of a certain paraquat, which is like it's like a thing that we provide to the plants, and it's part of could possibly increase the onset and chance of developing Parkinson's disease after exposure to this paraquat. So we also focused our research on the effect of cognition, or how it influences cognition, as well as our biological factors. So for cognitive dysfunction, when we looked at cognitive dysfunction in Parkinson's patients only, we found that most Parkinson's patients showed a decline in cognitive function compared to overall healthy patients. And in terms of TBI, which is traumatic brain injury, this was also seen where deficit in certain cognitive functions like information processing was the most decline compared to other healthy patients. And then we looked at cognitive dysfunction in both Parkinson's and TBI. The reason that we did this is because of inconclusive evidence in the research, in the overall research that is present right now. We had to look at how Parkinson's itself affected cognitive function and how traumatic brain injury affected cognitive function. And then we looked at an overall similarities between the two. And for those patients who experienced both TBI and Parkinson's, how was their cognition affected compared to those that only experienced Parkinson's and only experienced the traumatic brain injury. So our question was, do Parkinson's patients who have endured TBI have a greater risk and severity of cognitive impairment? And they found there was a greater cognitive degeneration for those that had both Parkinson's and TBI in memory and preservation skills. So that was in line with what our understanding of the overall effect would be. And a similar study had found that head injury prior to Parkinson's had a decline in cognitive function as well. So this is what we originally predicted and what we were implying in the question that was presented above. So now we will look at two different types of molecules and biological factors that have an implication in our research in terms of Parkinson's disease and how traumatic brain injury could potentially contribute to that. So one is alpha-synuclein, which is a presynaptic neuronal protein, and the accumulation of alpha-synuclein is very characteristic of Parkinson's disease. And as this causes the death of the dopamine producing cells, which we've called, and which is known as the dopaminergic cells. So the brains are the patients that had exposed to traumatic brain injury had a greater accumulation of alpha-synuclein in their substantia nigra of the basal ganglia. And this was determined as a link between TBI and Parkinson's because it is also present in Parkinson's disease as well as in patients affected by traumatic brain injury. Tyrosine hydroxylase is another type, a biological correlate that we centered our research on. And this is also responsible for a lack of dopamine, which is a characteristic of this. And tyrosine hydroxylase itself is an enzyme that plays a key role in the synthesis of dopamine. So if it plays a key role in the synthesis of dopamine, then a lower concentration of this would result in less dopamine, which is characteristic of Parkinson's disease. And this was found in patients with traumatic brain injury. They had less of this enzyme, tyrosine hydroxylase, and therefore they had less dopamine concentration. And this could be another link between the two. Another thing we could look at is we looked at in our biological analysis was oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is due to different oxidative species, and these are very reactive in nature. And the accumulation of this could be very toxic for our bodies and can destroy DNA as well as interfere with the electron transfer chain, etc. So these must be removed from different cells. So, like it says, it's associated with mitochondrial dysfunction in the electron transport chain and different lipid peroxidations of the inner mitochondrial membrane. And this is another possible overlap between TBI and Parkinson's disease. Okay, and the last biological correlate that we looked at was neuroinflammation. And we focused on the nuclear factor kappa B, which stimulates gene expression of enzymes such as cyclooxygenase 2 in TBI. And this cyclooxygenase 2 has been found in the substantia nigra of the basal ganglia of patients with Parkinson's disease. And this has also been associated with the degradation of dopamine neurons. So we then focused our research after we looked at the cognitive and biological factors on the medication, which is the treatment and therapeutic targets of Parkinson's disease and traumatic brain injury separately in order to understand what possible treatments could be used for patients who have experienced a traumatic brain injury induced Parkinson's disease. So different treatments that were possible for Parkinson's disease include a lot of levodopa. So levodopa, which can increase dopamine production, and other such medication that we've listed in this slide. So if you're interested, you can take a look up. And so for traumatic brain injury, we also listed such medication and over-the-counter medication are sufficient for minimizing pain. So through the slide, our purpose and our research was to understand the medication that was given for Parkinson's disease separately and Parkinson's and traumatic brain injury separately. When we looked at traumatic brain injury induced Parkinson's, we found that there wasn't enough research to establish a possible medication or therapeutic target that could target both the diseases. And what we talked about in our research was the fact that there was inconclusive research and what could possibly be used as something that could target both of the diseases. So non-invasive treatment. So what we know about Parkinson's disease from me talking about this and just in general overall research is Parkinson's disease, like I said, affects overall movement because it affects the basal ganglia, which is responsible for our voluntary movement and control and smoothing of movement, like I said. So because Parkinson's disease is associated with a lack of that movement and affects that movement, these non-invasive treatments have been focused on determining to increase that motor capability. So the motor weakness and lack of stability are common for both Parkinson's disease as well as patients of traumatic brain injury. Motor weakness is characterized by an abnormal gait and lack of stability is characterized by frequent falls. So through our discussion of non-invasive treatments that could potentially target both Parkinson's as well as traumatic brain injury, we looked at research focusing on the effect of treadmills and aquatic therapy, as well as virtual reality. And virtual reality has been found to show success for Parkinson's patients with no traumatic brain injury for traumatic brain injury patients. So more research is required to understand how these non-invasive treatments that target developing motor skills could be beneficial for both patients who develop traumatic brain injury as well as Parkinson's and those that have TBI-induced Parkinson's disease. So that's all for our research. And if you do have any questions, we would love to hear the questions. You could send an email to Berkeley Pharma Tech. But on behalf of my team, I would like to thank all of you guys for those of you who watched our presentation. And hopefully it was of interest to you and you learned something of it. And thank you for your time and hope you have a good day.